Welcome to episode 141 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing producer Tom Noonan, who was an executive producer on such projects as the Academy Award-winning film Crash. We walk through the process of how he got involved with Crash, but we also talk specifically about how his production company found scripts and got involved with projects like Crash. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 141. I just want to mention a free webinar that I'm doing on Wednesday, September 28th. 2016 at 10 a.m. Pacific time. It's called How to Effectively Market Your Screenplay and Sell It. I'm going to go through all the various online channels that are available to screenwriters and give you my unfiltered opinion of them. I get questions all the time like, does the blacklist work, or should I try Inktip, or which contests should I enter? I've tried pretty much every marketing channel available to screenwriters, and I'm going to share my experiences with you guys that are on this webinar. Again, this webinar is completely free. Don't worry if you can't make it to the live event. I'll be recording this event, so if you sign up, you'll get a link to the recorded event after it happens. To sign up, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/free webinar. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/free webinar. And free webinar is all lowercase and all one word. I will, of course, be linking to it in the show notes as well, so you can just find the show notes and click over to it from there. Also, if you already are on my email list, you don't need to register for this webinar. Anyone who is on my email list will get an email with all of the details about how to go to the class when the time comes. So a quick few words about what I'm working on. Once again, the main thing I'm trying to push through is post-production on my crime action thriller film, The Pinch. I've been talking about that now for almost a year. A year ago, I started talking about it here on the podcast. We shot it in July. Now I'm in post-production. The IMDb page is shaping up nicely, so if you haven't had a chance to look at that, definitely give it a look. We put up a poster on the IMDb page. Any feedback you have on that, I'd be happy to hear it. I still have to add all the Kickstarter people to the Kickstarter credits, which I should be doing in the next week or so. So if you're getting a credit because of your Kickstarter donation, you should see that go through in the next couple of weeks. I need to set up all the social media accounts for The Pinch as well as the website. So that's on my list of things to do as well. I want to get all this stuff done sooner rather than later. I was listening to a podcast the other day where they had a distributor on, and she was talking about some of the things that distributors look for low-budget films. And one of the things was a social media following, a decent follower count on Twitter, and a decent like count on Facebook. And having those shows that the filmmaker has started to market and build awareness for the film. So those things, at least according to this distributor, do matter a little bit. And especially for something that's super low budget like this, where I don't have a lot of stars. I don't have any, stars, super famous actors in the film. So it's going to be these sort of other things that distributors will look at once I begin to try and sell this film. So I want to get that stuff rolled out. That's really just the bottom line. I want to get it done sooner rather than later. I probably should have done that stuff when I was doing the Kickstarter campaign, because I'm sure a lot of people that were following the Kickstarter campaign would have, liked the Facebook page and liked the Twitter account at that point. So probably should have done it, but better late than never. But I need to get that done here. Hopefully I'll do it this week, but if not this week, definitely in the next week or two. My editor has nearly the first 20 minutes cut together. It's a rough cut. There's a few pieces that are still missing from those first 20 minutes, but basically has the first 20 minutes sort of loosely cut together. It's shaping up nicely. I got to watch that last week. It is definitely going slower than I would like. My editor had a few other projects that he was working on. He had to get those off his table. Now he's telling me that those are done. So hopefully he's full-time now trying to get this rough cut finished up. We're hoping kind of the deadline deadline for that is in a couple of weeks. We'll have a full rough cut, and then we will begin to polish it up. Hopefully that will only take a few weeks as well. So hopefully in the next 5-6 weeks we'll have a locked picture. I think that's an aggressive timeline, frankly. So I'm not going to be overly concerned if I don't hit that deadline, but it would definitely be nice. Ideally, I'd like to get the whole movie 100% complete, everything, by early next year. I'd say that's kind of the loose timeline. There's quite a bit of stuff. Even once we lock picture, there's still a ton of just stuff that needs to be cleaned up. Obviously, the sound, the score, the color correction. There's a bunch of things that go in after you lock picture. There's still a bunch of pieces that need to get done. And I've still actually got, now that I'm thinking about it, I've still got a bunch of special effects shots that need to get in there as well before we even lock picture. And that could probably take a month as well. So definitely a lot of pieces to this that need to come together, but again, early next year would kind of be the hopeful deadline of getting this thing 100% finished. There is this old adage in low budget filmmaking: you can have 2 of these 3 items, but never all 3 of them, and that's cheap, fast, or good. Basically, when you're making your film, you can decide to have 2 of them. If it's going to be cheap and good, it's not going to be fast, and that's kind of where I'm at. Obviously, I don't have a huge budget for the film. I do definitely want it to be good, so I know that the timeline is the one thing, the speed is the one thing I don't want to push too hard and compromise quality, because if you have a lot of money, you can do it fast because you can pay a lot of people. You can just keep pouring money at the problem. I don't have that luxury, so I want to still keep it good. Obviously, you don't want something that's cheap and fast, because then it won't be good. So I want to keep good in place. Obviously, I have to keep cheap in place. So I kind of know that the speed of this thing is the one variable that I can play with. I do want to keep it going, I want to keep things on track, but it's not going to bother me too much if it goes a little bit past early next year. I do know, as I said, sort of the flip side of that is I want this to be good, obviously, but the flip side of that is that I also know career-wise I need to get this thing done as quickly as possible so I can start trying to sell the movie and start working on my next project. Just having this thing in post-production and trying to get this thing through post-production is definitely taking up a lot of my time and just a lot of my creative energy. I'm not really starting to work on new scripts. I really want to get this one done and kind of see how it's received in the marketplace. Really, before I even start thinking about a next project, I want to write a project that I think I can sell. So part of the idea with this project is, taking it to distributors. And even if they don't necessarily want to distribute, hopefully it will be a, kind of just an in with these distributors. Hey, I got this movie. You want to check it out? And even if they don't want to distribute it, hopefully I can begin a conversation with those distributors about what kind of projects they can sell and what kind of projects they are looking for. And hopefully on the next one, I can be a little more tailor-made for a distributor. I can start to build some of those relationships. So that's all a part of this puzzle. And again, I just think I want to make sure that it's as good as I can possibly do. I want to put my best foot forward. And again, even if that takes a little extra time. Anyway, that's what I'm working on. So now let's get into the main segment of the podcast. Today, I'm interviewing producer Tom Noonan. Here is the interview.
Welcome, Tom, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So to start out, maybe you can give us a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into the business and just worked your way up the ranks.
Well, I went to film school at UCLA and graduated back in 1984. So it's been a minute that I've been in the business, but I'm happy to say that I've not only survived but thrived this entire time exclusively working in entertainment, and I'm very happy with the career that has unfolded before me. I've also been a volunteer and an active member on UCLA's steering committee, helping guide future graduates of the film school and teaching them. I've been teaching at the film school and the graduate program for the screenwriters and directors and producers there for the last 20 years, and I've helped improve, I think, the program in many ways. And one key way that I feel like I made a big contribution was I insisted that the graduate students and undergraduate students do at least 3 internships while they're in film school. When I was in film school, internships were not required. I did 6 internships, however, electively on my own, And it took me that much time to sort of find my place. My place, I realized, was in development. I was one of the few students at the film school who didn't have the courage to become a writer, didn't have the skills or relationships to become a producer, and wasn't confident enough to become a director. But I knew I wanted to work in entertainment, and so I started doing internships just to see, like, what else can people do. And I saw that development was a great path for me, and I began reading at HBO. And again, this was like 35 years ago. And I discovered the script, The Terminator, and championed that script. And as a result, I got a lot of notoriety back in the day for that, and then ended up getting an executive job at Goober Peters in TV movies while I was still in film school. I got that executive job when I was 20 years old, and became an expert at TV movies and miniseries. And TV movies and miniseries back then in the entertainment business were to television what reality shows are today. In other words, they were ubiquitous. The network that had the least number of TV movies on was ABC, and they had 3 movies on a week, and that was the least number. So if you think about, like, how many TV movies networks run today, it's practically zero. Every now and then they'll run a mini-series, but there's only a few cable networks today that even do TV movies. You know, like Lifetime still does it, the Hallmark Channel does. But the medium has changed radically, and formats come and go. And so we saw sort of the death of the TV movie in the mid-'90s. And it's shown comebacks here and there, but for the most part, it's something that was sort of on its way to dying out when I first got involved in it. Mm-hmm. I saw that television was something that I could really make my mark in, and I saw that series television was where I needed to head, because that's really where I saw the future of TV, as far as where both the most creative influence and power was concerned. And I studied the people who had been successful before me, past network presidents like Brandon Tartikoff and Brandon Stoddard and Grant Tinker and others. They all had experience in series television, and particularly in comedy TV. So I made it my goal to get into comedy television, which was difficult because I was all the way over in the wilderness of TV movies, you know. Mm-hmm. So I ended up working for a few producers and production companies, for Goober Peters, and then I ran TV movies and miniseries for Chuck Fries, who at the time was the largest movies and miniseries producer in the world. And then Jerry Weintraub, the notorious film and television producer and music manager, began his own startup, a Weintraub Entertainment Group, and I got recruited to run movies for television there, and that's when I said, listen, you've got to let me get into series. I knew it would probably be too big of a jump for him to let me run comedy because I had no background in it at that point, but he did let me run drama. So it was movies, miniseries, and drama series. And along the way, I was doing some pretty big projects. At Freeze, I did the Randy Quaid, LBJ TV movie. At Weintraub, I did the 5th highest rated movie of all time, which still has that claim, which is the Karen Carpenter story. And finally, the network started to call me. And as I mentioned, I really wanted to get into series because it served my greater vision of maybe one day becoming a network president. I had, when I was as early as 20 years old, I started going to these luncheons in Hollywood that still happen today, called the Hollywood Radio and TV Society lunches. It's the HRTS. And I was fortunate enough to see the biggest luncheon of the year. They do like 6 or 7 a year. And it was with the 3 network chiefs. There were only 3 networks at the time, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And it was with the chairman of the HRTS moderating it. And I thought at 20 years old, I thought, wow, I'd like to do both of those things. I'd like to be a network president. I'd like to be chairman of the Hollywood Radio and TV Society. I started studying these people, and that's when I got the formula, if you will, for becoming a network president, and then along the way becoming maybe the chairman of the HRTS too, because philanthropy has always been a big part of my life. So ABC ponied up with an offer to make me head of movies for television. I was 26 years old at the time, and I took it, even though I wanted to be in series TV, to serve this greater goal of becoming a network president. No one was giving me that chance. So I realized, I've got to become just truly exceptional at something before somebody gives me what I really want. And so I'm churning along at ABC Movies, and suddenly the Fox network is born. And it seemed like a network that was built for me. It was Cops, America's Most Wanted, and then this little show, The Simpsons, came around. And I just thought, wow, everything they're doing is exactly what I'd like to be doing and what I watch. It felt brazen, edgy, out of the box, kind of more male skewing when network TV was at the time very female skewing. And sure enough, they called me and said, look, we'd like you to come in and we'd like you to run drama series. And at that point, I felt like I'd really paid my dues. I had, worked very hard to establish a reputation and a work ethic in movies for TV that would give me leverage to do what I wanted to do in the future. And so I said, no, I'd rather run comedy. And, they balked at first and said, you've got no experience with that. And I said, no, but I do have experience of being a very good executive, very creative, strong, and reliable. And so Peter Chernin, who was president of the network at the time, who then went on to become head of the studio and then the number 2 person at all of News Corp, who's now a very successful film and television producer and new media supplier. Peter really put me through the ringer. He interviewed me for 3 or 4 months. I had to come up with something crazy like 100 comedy ideas, 200 writers who could create for comedy. I had to identify feature filmmakers and talent that might cross over to television, which was unheard of at the time. And after 3 months, he hired me to be head of comedy. And I said, wow, you really made me work hard for that. You really turned me into an expert with this. And he said, no, I just wanted to get to know you. I just wanted to see if I liked you. And that was a really big aha moment for me, because you hear those kind of goofy phrases in Hollywood all the time. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And that's halfway true. It does matter who you know, but obviously it really matters what you know as well. Mm-hmm. And so I got anointed to become the head of comedy at Fox in its glory years, and I was part of a group of 6 or 7 executives who had been recruited to build that network from a 3-night-a-week programming service to a 7-night-a-week broadcast network. And we entered in the NFL. Rupert bought the NFL at that time, and he was able to buy it and convince the NFL to come to Fox because we had built a schedule that was so user-friendly for young males, which was, of course, the NFL's primary target audience. Mm-hmm. So I became executive VP of all the programming at Fox. I was running comedy, drama, alternative, and late night. I was one step away from achieving my dream as network president, but then Rupert brought in a guy from CBS to become president, and his first job was to get rid of me, because I didn't know this, but Murdoch at the time was having doubts about the kind of programming we were doing, and he, as an older man, much preferred programming like that CBS was better known for. So for a year or so, they tried doing much more traditional programming. It tanked, and they went back to their playbook. But I was long gone at that point, and I had become president of NBC Studios. And this is right when the financial and syndication rules were lifted, where networks could now own the majority of their programming, and NBC didn't have a studio and wasn't aligned with any studio. So they asked me to come in and build it, and I did, and we did a number of historic shows together. Probably we're best known for Will and Grace. And I had achieved another dream of mine, which is to be president of a studio. While I was doing that, UPN and the WB were born, I really had a strong feeling I would get called up to run one of those places because I had a variety of network experience at this point, and it would make sense for someone to recruit me for something like that. And sure enough, UPN called, and I ended up becoming president of UPN. And while I was president of UPN, I had already become vice chairman of the Hollywood Radio and TV Society. And while I was there, at UPN, I was made chairman of the Hollywood Radio and TV Society, which was, as I mentioned, another dream of mine. So I was president of programming for UPN for almost 5 years, and I realized I'm helping build all of these companies, whether it's Fox or NBC Studios, which we then built into NBC Universal, UPN, which is now the CW. I should try to build something for myself, and so I created Bullseye Entertainment, which is still operating today. We're a film and TV company. We're probably best known for the multiple Academy Award-winning film Crash, but we've done The Illusionist. We did a TV movie called My Fake Fiancé with Melissa Joan Hart and Joey Lawrence. It became Melissa and Joey as a series. We've done several reality shows, and anyway, I wanted to branch out and do things on my own. The entire time, I continued to get back to my alma mater, UCLA, and I've taught over the last 20 years to help students understand that there is actually a blueprint that you can build for your career, whether you're a writer, producer, director, actor, executive, doesn't matter which, and that and that the ladder for success isn't as invisible as people believe it is. So I've helped out a lot of students and clients over the years. I have a thriving consulting business where I help also consult big media companies and private individuals who want my help. And this weekend that Corey and I are doing, called Script to Career, on October 8th and 9th, I think harnesses a lot of those lessons that have been well honed over the course of my career.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and we'll get into Script to Career here in a minute. Let me just dig into a couple things that you just said, and let me get your take on them. You mentioned that you're a big proponent of internships for these students that are going through these different film programs. And I'm curious, I just did a micro-budget film, and I went out to all the film schools, tried to just get some film students to be PAs, and literally was able to get 0 people. And one of the conversations I had with a young man who was in this position was that there's this attitude now that, hey, let's just go shoot something ourselves, put it up on YouTube, and that will get us a deal with a major studio. And I kind of almost feel like that the younger generation is missing that apprentice stage. Are you finding success? You're saying you're requiring them to do 3 internships. Are you finding a lot of success with that?
Well, when you say am I finding success with it, what do you mean? Do you mean the students I'm teaching?
Yeah, the students are willing to do this and happy to do this.
Well, like you said, they have to do it. They don't have a choice. So whether or not they're happy doing it or not, I haven't done a happiness meter, with them on it. But I do know that they're grateful because they have to do at least 3 internships, and it has to be with 3 different companies. So they have the option to renew an internship with a company if it's really successful, as long as they do their other 2 internships. Mm-hmm. But what we're forcing them to do is expose themselves to the way that the larger industry that's functioning on a professional level, meaning it's hiring, it has a hiring infrastructure, it creates content, it distributes content. For the student to get exposed to that and really ask themselves, where do I fit? What you might have encountered when you were making your film is sometimes if you're not a viable, approved content organization, the student can't get class credit for an internship like that on just a production. So that may have been part of the reason you suffered resistance. It could also be, like you said, that these kids were indifferent to your offer and wanted to just do it themselves. But there has to be something in it for them too beyond just the experience. And in our case, we have them doing internships at places that offer them class credit as well.
Yeah, sure. So let me just drill down on something you kept saying numerous times in giving your background. You kept saying that you would study people. You would see a network president and you would study them. Maybe you can just give us a little insight into exactly how you would study them and what information you could get and how that helped you. Because I think that's a great way for people to navigate their careers, is look at the people who are successful and then dig into what they did. But maybe you can just give us a little insight into what your process looks like when you're studying someone.
Well, what was interesting at the time, if you think about it, like there was no internet, and so it was really difficult actually to get biographical information about these executives. I had to go to libraries. I had to contact the publicity departments at the networks to get their bios. I mean, it was difficult. And the funny thing is I don't remember anyone even telling me to do this. I think I was genuinely curious and just wanted to know. And once I started gathering information and saw that there were intersections in what was, at the time, it was all just white guys, so I could just say with these guys and their careers, and I started to see things, consistencies that I could duplicate in 1980s terms that they had done in the 60s and 70s. So it just was really old school research, where I was going to the library and I was looking at periodical listings and checking out things and going on microfiche and, using terms over this interview that probably are mystifying to your listeners, But today it's so much easier, like let's say that if you wanted a career that was like Seth Rogen's career, if you wanted a career like Kevin Hart's, or if you wanted a career like Quentin Tarantino's, you can just go on Wikipedia and look at their story. And when I'm teaching, I always make sure that the students that I'm working with have at least 3 role models, and that they share with me, one of their assignments is to share with me what are the common things that their role models did in the first 3 years of their career, like whenever their education stopped. Because a lot of superstars, just like in high tech, a lot of superstars in the entertainment business don't finish school. Going all the way back to like Steven Spielberg, never finished college. So I always say, okay, well, take me from where they stopped education and what they did in their first 3 years, and let's see if we can duplicate that for you.
So let's dig into Crash now, and maybe you can kind of talk us through that process. How did you get involved with that script and kind of walk it through to production?
Well, the mission statement for our company, for Bullseye Entertainment, was that we wanted to do elevated... Oh, excuse me 1 second. We wanted to do elevated film and television shows that would cross over talent from TV to film and from film to TV. And so my background, I was partnered with a woman named Kathy Schulman, who's gone on to become an executive at Mandalay and STX. But while we were partnered together in Bullseye, Kathy had a very similar feature film career as an executive as I had in TV, excuse me, up to that point. And so she was able to bring motion picture relationships into the television equation, and I was able to bring TV relationships into the film equation for us. And so one of my colleagues from TV was the writer, showrunner, Paul Haggis. And Paul had written a screenplay entitled Crash with a fellow writer named Bobby Moresco. And they were having a terrible time getting it funded around town. All of the studios had passed on it, and they just couldn't get arrested. And we were new kids in town, so we were, as far as a production company is concerned, and so they submitted the script to us, and it was through my relationship with Paul that we brought it in-house and gave it a really strong read, and decided that it fit the model that we were doing at the time, which was independently financed films. So I brought the script in, and then Kathy, who was more of our feature film expert, then helped shape the project with Paul and Bobby, and we got casting going and got the film funded, and went to town with it.
And did you already know that you had an eye on making it into a TV series as well?
In the back of our minds, well, what happened with Paul, I don't know if you've seen the film, but it starts off with a carjacking. And it's this sort of like upscale Brentwood family, played by Brendan Fraser and Sandy Bullock. And they get carjacked by the actors Lorenz Tate and Ludacris. And that really happened to Paul. He was carjacked, and when he got his car back, movies that he had rented from Blockbuster were missing, and they were these art house films, and really obscure art house films that he had rented. And he was thinking, like, what are these two guys who, seem like they could be from like South Central or whatever, doing with these art house movies? Like, why did they keep those? And he just found himself musing about, where did the story go? Like, what if I were to write a movie that started with a carjacking, and then instead of following the white couple exclusively, we followed the African American guys back too, and got to know them as people, and it then started kind of crisscrossing and connecting in the magical ways that Paul and Bobby created. Paul, when he conceived it, thought of it first as a TV show, and because that was his background, and he got Sidney Pollack involved, and they pitched it to HBO, and anyway, they couldn't get it made. Nobody wanted to produce it, and so finally Paul, in a fit of frustration, wrote it as a feature and tried to get that made, couldn't get it made, and then brought it to me, and then we got it financed and made, and then ultimately distributed by Lionsgate. In the back of our minds, therefore, there were always these seeds for it as a TV show that had existed from the very beginning because of Paul's background and his imagination. Mm-hmm. But when we were making the movie, it was the furthest thing from our minds to then adapt it into a TV show. It wasn't until after the movie was made and we had gotten distribution that we started to think, maybe we could sell this as a TV show too.
Yeah. So I want to dive into just two things that you just mentioned. You mentioned when you got the script, there were some sort of check boxes, like you said, this is kind of the material we wanted to work with. But maybe you can dive into that and tell us exactly what about this script attracted you to it. Was it the characters? Was it the story? Was it Paul's background? You knew he had a lot of experience. Just what exactly attracted you to this script? Especially given the fact that everybody else had rejected it at this point. So you must have been looking at this thing thinking, gee, is this really any good?
Well, at the time that we read the script, the only prejudice that we had against it was that it was written by a TV guy. So I was kind of rooting for it to be good because I wanted my TV brethren to be treated with respect, Mm-hmm. So I had a rooting interest for Paul in it and reading it. And so that was the only prejudice, is that my colleagues were probably a little bit more elitist and snobbish about, like, well, this guy comes from TV. It can't be that great. It can't be that cinematic. And so that was the only prejudice. It wasn't until we sat with Paul and Bobby did we learn at that point that everyone had passed on it already, So we didn't have that prejudice going in. It's not like they sent us a script and said, hey, how'd you like to read Crash, the script that everyone hates,
Sure.
So we learned afterwards that everyone hated it. And I'll tell you what, to answer your question, not looking at it just strictly in creative terms, what what you do with, I think, in my experience with any script, is you hope to get grabbed in the first 10, 15 pages, and you're also wanting to make sure it's as professional and smooth and experienced possible while reading it. In other words, if you start to see typos or grammar mistakes, or if suddenly a page is missing or out of order, like, people intuitively are looking for any reason to put a script down and say, I'm not going to finish this thing. Because as you know, it's really hard work reading a script. If you're a professional, it's hard work because you're really having to engage your mind and be creative and immerse yourself in a world someone else has designed, Mm-hmm. And to be willing to do that over and over again, and in my case, for thousands of times now, I'm looking for any reason to stop reading. And what your job as a young writer is to do, or as a successful writer, is to not let me stop reading. And if you've read the script for Crash, which also won the Academy Award for Screenplay, you know that you just can't put it down. It grabs you and it doesn't let go, and it's so unpredictable and so fascinating and so funny in many cases, along with being like one of the most harrowing scripts I've ever read dramatically. It was sensational. So when we heard that everyone had passed on it, we were thrown, but this was at the beginning of what we're all experiencing now today, which is the beginning of studios going almost exclusively to funding franchise properties, whether it's comic books or old TV show titles or, amusement park rides or young adult novels, whatever. Mm-hmm. IP and the importance of an existing title was just coming into fashion then. And so this slice-of-life movie that deals with the issues of intolerance and fear didn't fit their model, so the only route seemed to be to get it funded independently, and that's what we knew how to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm curious just about a company like yours, and again, you don't have to talk specifically about your company, but I'm just curious sort of in generalities. Where do your submissions come from? It sounds like you had a pre-existing relationship with Paul, so that's an easy way for this script to get passed into your company. But in general, how does a company like yours, which is operating at a pretty high level, how do you guys find material? Does everything come through agents? Everything comes through relationships?
It's usually through relationships. It's usually through us talking about what we're looking for and then having people try to find that for us, or
talking to the agents. Like you would tell the agents, we're looking for something like this.
Sometimes it's agents, sometimes it's managers. Often it's the artists themselves, like we'll have existing writer relationships or fellow producers. All of the movies that we've funded so far, every project I've done so far, with the exception of a few shows that I've done abroad, I've done with partners. I've done with producing partners or company partners, where we work together to put the thing together. The thing with Paul came just completely out of my relationship with him through TV, So it's not. I can't even remember. Well, actually, the Melissa and Joey script, My Fake Fiancé, that came through a friend also, now that I think about it. It's very rare that an agent will call me and say, oh, I've got a terrific script that you need to read, and I don't know the name of the writer, I don't know anything about the person. I read it, and it's great. It's almost always through a personal relationship.
Mm-hmm. So let's dig into just TV writing for a little bit. Maybe you can talk about some of your TV projects And just with sort of an eye to giving some advice to people who are trying to break into television. And maybe we can start with Crash. Obviously, the film was a success, so maybe that made it a little bit easier. But
yeah,
how did
that made it a lot easier?
A lot easier. So then how does something like, so maybe Crash is not a good example to use. Let's talk about maybe Angela's Eyes or Gone Country. Maybe you can talk about how those projects came to you and ultimately got turned into TV shows.
Well, so I was a friend with this guy named Dan McDermott who I'd gone to film school with, and he was an executive at DreamWorks, and he became a screenplay writer. And so he left his executive life to pursue his writing dreams. And he had sold a big spec script to, I think it was Fox 2000 at the time, and then he started like really branching into creating other projects. And I told him I wanted to work with him, and sell something to the networks that he created. So he came up with the surveillance show, and we sold it to Fox originally. And in fact, I think it was just called Surveillance. And it was just this undercover spy show, and I don't remember at the time if it had an FBI element or not. Anyway, it never went anywhere, but I still really believed in Dan and believed in frankly more in his talent than in the material at that time. It was good, it was solid and strong, but I really wanted to work with him and wanted to collaborate with him, and I believed he had a hit show in him. And so we took Surveillance after Fox had passed on it. We took that to, I think it was to USA, and they helped us hone it. They bought it, and they helped us hone it into more of a single lead show. And we developed it further, and it was their idea then to make the lead a female. And so we developed it even further, and Dan at that point had the concept of having the lead. And you've probably read about this, and there was a Fox show that came on years after our show premiered. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. You'll remember it though. But the where the lead has the ability to see if you're lying or not. They're almost like a human lie detector. Do you remember that show with Fox? There was a British actor that portrayed a very similar role.
Yeah, vaguely. I can't think of the title either.
I hate to be boring to your listeners, but
No,
they're
okay.
all screaming at it. They're screaming the title at us right now, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Anyway, so we changed the lead to a female, and then it just sat on a desk at USA for over a year, maybe longer. And I was out making the rounds, trying to sell other shows, and I heard from my colleague Kevin Beggs at Lionsgate, who I was developing Crash with as a TV show. He said, Lifetime is looking for some cop shows. They're looking for their closer, which USA, or I think it was USA at the time, had the closer on with Kira Sedgwick.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I've got the perfect show. And so our show was just sort of languishing at USA, and so I asked the executives at USA that if I could get an order from a different network, would you let me take it out? Because unlike Fox, USA hadn't passed on this show yet, So I had to get permission from USA to submit it to Lifetime. I submitted it to Lifetime. They loved the script, and they not only ordered a pilot, they ordered 13 firm episodes off the pilot script. And that's how Angela's Eyes came about. It only ran for 13 episodes. It was, I think, a little bit ahead of its time in that Abigail Spencer, who was our star, has gone on to star in many different films and TV shows since then. In fact, she's got a big new show coming on NBC this fall called Timeless, I think. And in any event, she wasn't a big enough star to draw their audience at the time, and ultimately I don't think that they had confidence that they could build on it for a second season. But, it started, Angela's Eyes began with my faith in Dan and his ability to create an original show, an original character, and never really giving up. you don't hear of that many TV projects that move from network to network, like the story I just told you, but it can happen. And frankly, it's happened over and over again with me, where I've started a show one place, like Crash began at FX and ended up on Stars, but it didn't begin its life at Stars.
Yeah. Just real quickly, I want to just touch on, you mentioned the HRTS, and you said it was still around today. Maybe you can just give a plug to that organization. It sounds like something that, our listeners might want to check out. And maybe you can just tell us how they can learn more about it.
The Hollywood Radio and TV Society, or the HRTS, is the longest-running nonprofit philanthropy in Hollywood, and it's a TV-oriented nonprofit. It helps workers and disabled people and retirees from the TV industry to make their journey a little bit better when they're suffering. And they raise money through what's called newsmaker events. And the organization sells tickets to all the studios and networks and agencies and management companies and production companies interested in sort of networking and fellowship as a community at these newsmaker events. And they're highly attended, typically sold-out events, drawing as many as 600 to 1,000 people per event. And while I was chairman of the HRTS, I created something called the Junior HRTS, because even though these events were really cool and often sold out, they would usually be populated at these tables by only the senior executives at these companies. So a lot of mid-level people or lower-level people would want to go to these events, for networking opportunities and just to learn more by these, the newsmakers we attracted. But they weren't welcome because there weren't enough seats available. So we created a Junior HRTS, which now is thriving even more strongly than the HRTS. And this is an organization that appeals mostly to people more interested in the executive track or becoming producers. It's not really something that writers and directors go to. It's more of a non-writing, non-creative, more business-oriented organization to learn more about the business. But that's what the HRTS is.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about Script to Career. It's a 2-day seminar here in Los Angeles. You're doing it with Corey Mandel, and as you mentioned, it's October 8th and 9th at Haynes Hall on the UCLA campus. Maybe you can tell us, you're speaking one day and Corey is speaking the other day. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about on the day that you're speaking.
Well, I have good news for you, which is we're actually hopscotching both days. So in other words, if you hate me, you'll only have to endure me speaking for like an hour and a half, and then it goes to Corey, and then back to me, and so we're constantly keeping it fresh for attendees, because what we both learned through attending our own number of seminars over the years, both as guests, VIP guests, and just as a paying customer, is as much as you may love someone or really regard them or really want to learn from them, listening to someone lecture for 6, 8, 10 hours a day, nonstop, is a lot to ask. Even if you're, even if you're watching Tony Robbins or something, it's exhausting. So part of the reason that Corey and I partnered is so that the attendee could get a refreshing and new sort of set of information every hour or two from both of us, so that we and we also have Q&As at the end of each day where both of us are on stage together. So yeah, it's a 2-day event where we're each covering 4 major topics, and we have Q&As, and we're even going to have a surprise guest on Sunday. So yeah, that's the general shape of it.
Perfect. And what sort of people do you think could benefit from this the most? Is it people starting out their careers, people, that have already have established careers? Who is this sort of aimed at?
I think, the weekend is aimed at anyone interested in improving their lot in entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I think it's largely oriented to people writing and creating. And obviously there's much more opportunity in television these days than there is in film, just by the sheer scale of the number of shows that are being produced. Literally over 500 shows are being made right now versus just a minuscule number of films that the studios are financing. So I think it's for people who are a little frustrated, who want more out of their career. And that could be someone who's just starting out. It could be someone in the middle of their career. It could be someone who's not willing to give up yet, towards the end of their career, who wants to get a reboot.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So I will get the website, and I will put that in the show notes so people can click over and learn more about that and potentially sign up for it. I always just like to end the interviews by asking the guests if they have a Twitter account or Facebook page or blog, anything you feel comfortable sharing. If someone just wants to kind of learn more about you or follow along with what you're doing, what's the best way for people to do that?
Well, I'm on Twitter, but I don't really tweet that often. I really think the best way to know me is either through Facebook personally, and I'm just Tom Noonan at Facebook, Nunan, or to just go on our site, which is Script to Career.
Okay, perfect. Well, Tom, this has been a great interview. I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me.
My pleasure, Ashley. Anytime.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just a couple of quick notes. If you have any interest of attending the Script to Career Summit that Tom was talking about, they did offer Selling Your Screenplay listeners a generous coupon code, and that coupon code is SYS16, and that will give you $100 off when you sign up. So just look for the spot where you put in a coupon code when you're checking out and put in SYS16, and you'll get $100 off. I will put that all in the show notes. I will link to it as well. Again, it is scripttocareer.com. In addition, Tom mentioned the Hollywood Radio and Television Society. I will link to that as well. I don't really know a lot about it, anything other than what Tom just mentioned, but it sounds like a cool thing, so something definitely to check out, and I will link to that in the show notes as well. But definitely check out scripttocareer.com, and as I said, if you're interested in attending, you get $100 off for listening to the SYS podcast, and that coupon code, again, is SYS16. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, characters, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on feature films or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis that I just talked about on the treatment or synopsis. So if you're looking to vet some of your projects, this is a great way to do it. We will also write a logline and synopsis for you. You can add this service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your script gets a recommend from a reader, you get a free email and fax blast to my list of industry contacts. This is the exact same blast service I use myself to promote my own scripts, and it's the same service I sell on the website. It's a great way to get your script into the hands of producers who are looking for material. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Tom. I hope it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone when Tom said that for the most part, the scripts like Crash that his company produced were scripts that they found through an existing, established relationship. I talk about this on the podcast quite often. After I did about 75 episodes of the podcast, I went through and kind of broke down, and I created a nice chart on exactly how screenwriters broke into the industry. And networking was far and away the single biggest way that people broke in. And among networking, which is kind of maybe a vague term, it was all about working in the industry. That was the single biggest way people broke into the industry. And again, that should come as no surprise to anyone, because when you work in the industry, you build relationships. And that's really the question I think more screenwriters should be asking themselves. How can I build relationships with real producers who are producing good movies? There's literally an infinite number of ways that you can do this. Again, I would recommend, I will link to it in the show notes. There's a whole bunch of ways that these first, as I said, 75 writers that came on my podcast, there's a whole bunch of different ways that they broke in. And this article really breaks that down. Everybody has different circumstances, different situations. So not all ways will work for all people. But again, I think people need to think about that as kind of the key metric, is how can you build relationships? Did I build relationships through this marketing channel? It's not always about selling a screenplay or optioning a screenplay. It's really about building these relationships. I get questions all the time from people asking me stuff like, how many scripts have been sold through the email and fax blast service that I sell through SYS Select. And while this has happened, in fact, it happened to Dan Benamore, who was on the podcast last week. He used my email and fax blast service, and he sold a script straight away. It was no option. A producer literally just read the script and bought it from him. And so it can definitely happen. But people who are asking this question, I often feel like they're missing the point, or maybe not the point, but they're missing one of the main benefits of doing these email and fax blasts. And again, I get emails from a lot of people who have no real interest in being a screenwriter, but they have written a script, maybe a life story or the life story of their great-grandfather. They have one script that they want to get out there, but they don't want to pursue screenwriting as a career. And again, I think those people, I usually advise those people not to bother with the email and fax blast service, because I feel like they're missing out on one of the key components, one of sort of the, not even the key component, the main thing that you are likely to get out of the email and fax blast is building these relationships. A lot of the people that I deal with, producers, a lot of the people that I've built relationships, one of the producers on The Pinch, in fact, is a guy that I met through my own email and fax blast service. He's on my email and fax blast. I started to send him scripts. He liked some of the scripts. We talked, we met a few times, and then now we produced. Again, he was one of the other producers on The Pinch. So that's a relationship that I built through the email and fax blast. He never bought one of my scripts. He never optioned one of my scripts. It's just a relationship that was built through that. And so again, that's one of the main benefits. It's not, well, how many scripts have been sold, or, how much money. I get these emails too. How much money am I going to make, or am I likely to make if one of the producers likes my script? It's like, don't get too caught up in that kind of stuff. Look at these email and fax blast services, as any of these services, as a way to build connections and build relationships and network with producers. You just don't know where these things are going to lead, but that's really the foundation of any screenwriting career, any career, directing, producing, any career in the entertainment industry. It's really built on relationships and who you meet. One of the great things about doing The Pinch was just all the people that I met. You just put yourself out there, and just all the crew. One of the actors who also was ended up coming on as a co-producer on The Pinch, I had a meeting with him last week. We're going to try and doing something else together. So again, it's about building these relationships, and there's a million ways to do it. I'm not necessarily here trying to just shill my own email and fax blast service. That's certainly not the only way you can do it. It is a way you can do it, and I think it's the primary benefit of doing these email and fax blasts is potentially to build these relationships. But there's a million ways you can do it. You can go and do a short film and submit it to film festivals, and all the people that help you with that short film, you'll be networking with them. All the people you meet at film festivals. And if you go to film festivals, you're going to find other filmmakers that are doing cool things, and you can meet those people. They will typically have like an opening night gala. and all the filmmakers will be there. All the people who are interested in films. Maybe you'll be in a town. I had a friend who had a film that was in the Sonoma Film Festival, and it was a really well-run festival, and there was a lot of like local people that were in there, and he was networking with some of the wealthy people that just lived in Sonoma, and some of them had potentially have interest in investing in films. So there's just a million ways to kind of get out there and get your stuff to people and start to network it. But don't always just get so caught up on, gee, I want to sell this script. Gee, I need to pay my bills. I need to sell these scripts. It's going to be a long road. It's going to take a long time to make these inroads. But building those relationships, they can last your lifetime. I mean, these people will become your peers, your friends, and these relationships can potentially last the rest of your life. And spending some time trying to foster those, I think, is very, very smart. It's really the best thing you can do for your career as a screenwriter. Again, no matter how you do it, really keep that in mind, at least in the short term, what your goal should be. And that should be building relationships and meeting people, real producers, talented producers who are actually producing movies. There's a ton of producers out there, wannabe producers, just like there are wannabe screenwriters. So, at some point you do have to do some vetting. You do have to look these people in the eye and decide if you think this person is someone who is actually going to be able to produce your movie. But again, keep your eye on the prize, and the prize is really the relationships, because the relationships will carry you through. The relationships are what is going to actually bloom into something substantial. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.